this is what Sophie went and said. She came out after the game and said this. I think if you heard what people called Maisha, then you probably would have been thrown out too. And how she reacted was valid. Like I said, all that happened, we got the dub, we got to dial in, be better on Wednesday.
Sophie Cunningham just did something that could blow this whole situation wide open. After watching her teammate Myisha Hines-Allen get ejected for confronting Alyssa Thomas, Sophie came out and made a statement that has the entire league talking. She didn't just defend the reaction, she justified it based on what was allegedly said on that court. And now everyone's asking the same question. What exactly did Alyssa Thomas say to Myisha Hines-Allen that was bad enough to trigger that kind of response? Because here's what we know. Myisha doesn't have a history of losing her cool. This isn't someone who snaps at random moments. So when Sophie Cunningham says if you heard what people called Myisha, you probably would have been thrown out too, that's not a casual statement. That's an accusation, and it's one that demands investigation.
If things flip the opposite way, and a player on the Fever, a player said, oh look, after what this player on the Fever said to me, the crash out was justified. The Fever player would be suspended and whatever tech would be rescinded. You just know it would. You genuinely just know it would. And it's one of those things where I wonder what Alyssa Thomas said. Because Alyssa Thomas is, I can't stand it.
Now watch Sophie's exact words here. She's not being vague. She's not saying things got heated or emotions were high. She's specifically saying that what Myisha heard justified her reaction. That the crashdown was valid. That anyone in that position would have responded the same way. Those are strong words from a teammate who was on that bench and saw everything unfold. But here's where this gets complicated. If the roles were reversed, if an Indiana Fever player had said something derogatory to an opposing player and that opponent reacted by confronting them, what would happen? Sophie herself acknowledges this double standard. The league would investigate immediately. There would be statements from the Players Association. Social media would explode. And yet, when it's Alyssa Thomas allegedly using a slur against Myisha Hines-Allen, there's silence. The WNBA has built its entire brand on inclusion, on respect, on creating a safe space for all players. They've suspended players for far less than what's being alleged here. So why the hesitation now?
And by the way, if Alyssa Thomas said that, for what? For playing on a team. And by the way, is this person not one of these people that like, oh yeah, shout out New York Liberty for, you know, paying for this person who refers to Myisha Hines-Allen, a player in the league, as the last four letters of the animal recruit. Shout out to New York Liberty for, you know, going out of their way to highlight them at a game. Shout out New York Liberty. Great organization and all that. But again, this is pre-Caitlin Clark, so that was the whole WNBA.
This is where the content creator in this clip makes a point that's hard to argue with. The league is scared of Alyssa Thomas. Not physically scared, but scared of the backlash, scared of the optics, scared of what it means to investigate one of their established stars. And that fear is creating a two-tiered system of accountability. Think about what we've seen this season. Caitlin Clark gets called out by name from opposing benches. Angel Reese makes gestures that draw technical fouls. Dejounai Carrington makes comments about all you people that spark controversy, and in each case, the league either stays silent or issues the most minimal response possible. But when it's a newer player or someone without the same level of protection, suddenly the rulebook gets enforced. The accusation here is that Alyssa Thomas used a four-letter racial slur against Myisha Hines-Allen. Now we need to be clear, this hasn't been confirmed by the league. There's no official statement. No audio has been released. But multiple people are talking about it like it's fact, and Sophie Cunningham's comments strongly suggest that something deeply inappropriate was said.
Online. So obviously, nobody knows that exact thing, that exact name was what Alyssa Thomas said to Myisha Hines-Allen. But if it was, it should be a suspension by Myisha. It should be a suspension for Alyssa Thomas. I know the WNBA are scared as fuck of Alyssa Thomas. Like, they're scared of her. Don't know why. Refs are scared of her. League is scared of her. No idea why. But if we gotta be real here, if that four-letter word was used by Alyssa Thomas towards another player, she should be suspended.
Here's what makes this particularly problematic. This incident happened in Indiana, in front of a home crowd. The only people close enough to say something directly to Myisha Hines-Allen during that play were opposing players and coaches. Sophie specifically says what people called Myisha, not what fans yelled or what happened in the stands. She's talking about what was said on the court, player to player, and if Alyssa Thomas did use a derogatory term, the context matters. This wasn't trash talk about basketball skills. This wasn't saying someone played badly or made a mistake. A racial slur is an attack on someone's identity, their humanity, their right to exist in that space. It's not competition, it's hate, and there's no place for it in professional sports. But let's address the elephant in the room. Some people online are already dismissing this because they don't like the Indiana Fever. They don't like the attention Caitlin Clark gets. They don't like that a team that was irrelevant for years is suddenly selling out arenas and drawing record ratings. So when something happens involving a Fever player, there's this automatic assumption that it's being blown out of proportion or that the player somehow deserved it. That bias is exactly why the league needs to investigate. Because if they don't, the message is clear. Your protection depends on which team you play for and how much the league values your marketability over your dignity.
I think it is very different. Could you imagine just any sort of comment, regardless of like personal shots? I say the statement. I think Stephanie White's not a very good coach and is a horrible coach for Caitlin Clark. Any player makes that statement. You can't make that. No, a player can't make that statement. That's just a general example. There's shit you can't say. There's shit you shouldn't say anyway. But like, obviously we know when it comes from a player. When it comes from a player, it's 1,000 times worse. Like, it means 1,000 times more. And if it turns out that that is what Alyssa Thomas said.
Now this is where the double standard becomes impossible to ignore. The creator here poses a hypothetical that cuts right to the heart of the issue. If Caitlin Clark had used a racial slur against another player, what would happen? We all know the answer. She'd be suspended for multiple games, possibly for the remainder of the season. There would be think pieces about racism in women's basketball. The Players Association would issue statements. Sponsors would be questioned about their endorsement deals. And that's exactly what should happen. Using a racial slur should have severe consequences, regardless of who says it. But that standard has to be applied equally. You can't create a system where certain players are untouchable and others are expendable based on narrative convenience. The WNBA has made it clear through their actions this season that they're more interested in protecting their pre-existing storylines than in enforcing their rules fairly. When Diana Taurasi and others made comments about Caitlin Clark before she even played a game, no consequences. When Chennedy Carter hip-checked Clark away from the ball in a dangerous play, the league upgraded it to a flagrant foul after public pressure, but Carter faced no suspension. When Derica Hamby called out the Las Vegas Aces for discrimination related to her pregnancy, the league's investigation was slow and the penalties were minimal.
Their player has said something to set them off. And it said, and not what they said, what they called her. The word, I think you heard what people call Myisha, you probably would have been thrown out too. And again, it's Indiana crowd. The only people that said anything to Myisha was Alyssa Thomas. Maybe DeWanna Bonner. So, look, we all know in this scenario here that if this flipped, and even if someone in the crowd said something towards Alyssa Thomas that she didn't like.
Here's what Sophie Cunningham's statement actually does. It forces the league's hand. By publicly stating that Myisha's reaction was justified based on what was said, Sophie has created a situation where the WNBA has to respond. They can't just let this fade away and hope everyone forgets about it. Because now there's a player on record saying that a derogatory term was used, and that changes the calculation. If the league investigates and finds that nothing inappropriate was said, then Myisha's ejection stands and everyone moves on. But if they investigate and confirm that Alyssa Thomas did use a slur, then we're talking about a multi-game suspension at minimum. We're talking about mandatory sensitivity training. We're talking about the league having to explain why they didn't act immediately when the incident occurred. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The WNBA doesn't want to suspend Alyssa Thomas. She's a veteran player on a championship contending team. She's respected around the league. She's not someone who generates controversy typically. Suspending her would be admitting that one of their established stars crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. It would be messy and complicated, and it would dominate the news cycle during the playoffs. But the alternative is worse. If the league refuses to investigate or investigates and buries the findings, they're essentially saying that certain players can say whatever they want without consequences. They're telling Myisha Hines-Allen and every other player who might face similar situations that their dignity is less important than the league's comfort.
By Alyssa Thomas towards Myisha Hines-Allen, there should be it is a derogatory term for a person of her race. That if that's used on a court, just because you don't like as a league, you don't like the Indiana Fever, or as old fans, as a group of old fans, you don't like any player that doesn't try to fight Caitlin Clark on a daily basis. They all hated Wanda Bonner when she joined Indiana.
This comparison to fan behavior is actually really important. The creator points out that if a fan in the stands had yelled a racial slur at a player, that fan would be ejected immediately. There would be stadium security involved. The team would likely ban that fan from future games. The league would issue a statement condemning the behavior. We've seen this happen in the NBA, in the NHL, in Major League Baseball. Sports leagues have gotten much better about removing fans who cross the line with racist language. So why would the standard be different for players? If anything, the standard should be higher. Players are representatives of the league. They're role models for young athletes. They're professionals who are paid to compete with respect and integrity. When a player uses a racial slur against another player, that's not just a personal failing. It's a violation of everything the league claims to stand for. And before anyone says we don't know for sure what was said, that's exactly why there needs to be an investigation. The league has access to court-level audio. They have the ability to interview players, coaches, and officials who were nearby. They can determine exactly what happened and what was said. The fact that they haven't announced an investigation yet is telling. Let's talk about what happens next, because this situation is far from over. Sophie Cunningham's comments have created a firestorm on social media. Fans are divided along predictable lines. Fever supporters are demanding an investigation and calling for Alyssa Thomas to be suspended. Sun supporters are defending Thomas and suggesting that Myisha overreacted, and neutral fans are mostly confused because the league hasn't provided any clarity about what actually happened. The WNBA finds itself in a position where any decision they make is going to upset a significant portion of their fan base. If they investigate and suspend Thomas, they'll face backlash from people who think they're only doing it because of pressure from Fever fans. If they don't investigate or investigate and find no wrongdoing, they'll face backlash from people who think they're protecting a veteran player at the expense of a newer one. But here's the thing, the right decision shouldn't be determined by who's going to be upset. The right decision should be determined by what actually happened and what the rules say should happen as a result. The WNBA has a code of conduct. They have policies about discriminatory language. They have a responsibility to enforce those policies consistently, regardless of who's involved. What makes this situation particularly significant is the timing. We're in the middle of a playoff race. The Indiana Fever are fighting for a postseason spot after years of irrelevance. The Connecticut Sun are one of the top teams in the league and a legitimate championship contender. A suspension for Alyssa Thomas could impact playoff seeding. It could affect team chemistry. It could change the entire trajectory of the postseason. And that's exactly why the league needs to act now rather than waiting until the offseason. Because if they wait, it looks like they're deliberately avoiding controversy during the most important part of their season. It looks like they're prioritizing ratings and playoff drama over player safety and dignity. It looks like they're more concerned with optics than with doing the right thing. Think about the message this sends to young players watching the league. If you're a high school or college player who dreams of playing in the WNBA, what do you learn from this situation? You learn that your protection depends on your status. You learn that some players are allowed to cross lines that others can't. You learn that standing up for yourself when someone disrespects you might get you ejected while the person who disrespected you faces no consequences. That's not the message a professional sports league should be sending. The WNBA has worked hard to position itself as a progressive league that values diversity and inclusion. They've been vocal about social justice issues. They've supported players who speak out about inequality. But all of that rings hollow if they won't investigate allegations of racist language being used on their own courts. Sophie Cunningham's statement also puts her teammates in an interesting position. By defending Myisha so publicly and so forcefully, Sophie has made it clear that the Fever locker room believes something inappropriate was said. That's not just one player's opinion. That's a team standing behind their teammate, And that solidarity matters because it shows this isn't about one person being overly sensitive or misinterpreting trash talk. This is about multiple people witnessing something that crossed a line. The question now is whether other players will speak up. Will anyone from the Connecticut Sun address what happened? Will Alyssa Thomas issue a statement denying the allegations? Will other players around the league weigh in on whether they think the incident warrants investigation? The silence from everyone except Sophie Cunningham is deafening, and that silence tells you something about the culture in the WNBA right now. Players are afraid to speak up because they don't want to be seen as causing drama or being difficult. They don't want to risk their relationships with other players around the league. They don't want to become targets for fans who disagree with them, so they stay quiet even when they see something that bothers them. But that culture of silence is exactly what allows inappropriate behavior to continue. If players don't feel safe calling out racism or discrimination when they see it, then those problems will persist. If the league doesn't create an environment where players can report incidents without fear of retaliation or dismissal, then the code of conduct becomes meaningless. Here's what should happen. The WNBA should announce an investigation immediately. They should interview everyone who was on the court during the incident. They should review all available audio and video. They should determine exactly what was said. And then they should apply their policies consistently based on the findings. If Alyssa Thomas used a racial slur, she should be suspended. Not a one-game suspension, not a fine, a meaningful suspension that reflects the seriousness of the offense. And there should be a public statement explaining the decision so that everyone understands the league takes this seriously. If the investigation finds that no slur was used, then the league should say that too. They should explain what actually happened and why Myisha Hines-Allen reacted the way she did. They should provide clarity so that this doesn't continue to fester and divide the fan base. What they can't do is nothing. What they can't do is hope this goes away on its own. Because Sophie Cunningham made sure it won't. By speaking publicly about what her teammate experienced, Sophie has ensured that this conversation will continue until the league addresses it properly. The broader issue here is about respect and accountability in professional sports. The WNBA is at a crossroads. They can either enforce their standards equally and show that every player deserves protection from discriminatory language, or they can continue with a system where consequences depend on status and marketability. They can either investigate allegations seriously and transparently, or they can sweep uncomfortable situations under the rug and hope the next news cycle moves on. This moment will define how the league handles controversy moving forward, because players are watching, fans are watching, sponsors are watching, and everyone is taking note of whether the WNBA's stated values match their actual actions when those values are tested. So the question isn't just about what happened between Myisha Hines-Allen and Alyssa Thomas during one play in one game. The question is about what kind of league the WNBA wants to be. Do they want to be a league where players are protected from racist language regardless of who they are or which team they play for? Or do they want to be a league where some players are more equal than others? Sophie Cunningham has put that question directly to the league office. Now we wait to see if they have the courage to answer it honestly. Because if they don't investigate this allegation seriously, they're not just failing Myisha Hines-Allen. They're failing every player who's ever faced discrimination and been told to just deal with it. They're failing the values they claim to represent. And they're showing that when it really matters, when enforcing the rules might be inconvenient or controversial, they'll choose the easy path over the right one.